If you clicked on this video, you must be interested in learning all about fiberglass and how to work with epoxy, gel coat, just composite materials in general. And if that's the case, you are in the right place. So first off, let me introduce myself. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. I'm a second generation professional U.S. Coast Guard licensed boat builder. I'm also a 100-ton captain, and the 29-footer behind us is a boat we built for our charter service. Now I'm telling you that because I know there's a lot of information on YouTube. You don't know who to trust sometimes. And our goal here with this channel is to make this a go-to resource for folks that want to become DIYers in the fiberglass and composite world. And it can be a little overwhelming if you've never worked with it before, but it doesn't have to be. It's actually quite simple if you just have someone who knows what they're talking about and can break it down in simple form. So that is the goal of this video today. So what we're going to do is start with the basics first. And we've got tables full of products today. Now, generally, when you're talking about fiberglass, you're going to have three main components. One of the big ones is going to be your resin, and then you're going to have a fiberglass fabric of some type, and then you're going to have like an activator or a catalyst for that. So I want to break down resins for just a moment because there seems to be a lot of confusion. Do we use a polyester, a vinyl ester, an epoxy, and what are the pros and cons? So what I've narrowed it down to is basically three types of resin. This is from Fiberglass Warehouse. This is an iso polyester tooling resin, and that is actually the same kind of resin that our 29-footer is built out of in its entirety. Chances are that your boat, watercraft, RV, fiberglass components that you may have at home, high probability it's built with a polyester resin. Now, notice on this one though, I specified an iso polyester resin. That is a very high grade polyester, and that is really the only one I recommend. There's a lot of other variations out there, but I don't personally use them in our family's boat shop. It's just a much better than your normal entry-level polyester resins. Now again, if you've been following the channel, this has become our go-to workhorse resin from Fiberglass Warehouse. That is their vinyl ester laminating resin. Vinyl ester is an upgrade from your iso polyesters, and it has exceptional tenacity when it's going to be bonding onto new surfaces. It also is very, very water resistant. So if you've got below the waterline repairs and you're worried about water migrating through, vinyl ester is a premium product. It's just going to be a little more expensive than your iso polyester. And then you would be moving into your epoxy resins. Now, notice this is a 2-to-1 mix ratio there. They call that a high performance 2-to-1. And generally, you're going to have all kind of different ratios with epoxy. You're going to have 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1. Generally, in your like 1-to-1s or 2-to-1s, there's a good chance that they're going to be amine blush free, which is what this particular one from Total Boat is. It does not produce an amine blush, which that is a byproduct of epoxy resin curing, and it's something that has to be cleaned off between coats. And I can't personally see, as a boat builder and repairman, any reason why you would deviate from that, especially at an entry point when you're just getting into working with resins and fiberglass. So you've kind of got good, better, best as far as its bond strength. Vinyl ester bonds almost as aggressively as epoxy, but epoxy has one little snafu there. A lot of times it's not completely compatible with overcoating with gel coat. Now I know that's a hot topic out there in the boat world, and there are even some products that we listed here on our channel previously that help you tie between epoxy and gel coat. But as a general rule, iso polyester, if you're going that route, going to be a little bit cheaper, entry level. Vinyl ester covers lots of bases, totally compatible with gel coat. And epoxy bonds very tenaciously, especially to odd materials, but it's going to be a little more expensive, and generally you can be a little tricky working with gel coat. Now, when we talk about fabrics, and again, there's a compatibility factor there. This is going to be a lightweight cloth. It is very common with like kayaks, even if you're doing model aircraft. something where you want to seal the surface, but you're not trying to build much thickness, and you may even want transparency. Another fine example of that being used would be on surfboards, where it's there, but it is very, very thin, and it is totally compatible with all of the resins we're showing here on the table. Now, we used a biaxial 1708 that's got a CSM stitched into the back. So you're kind of getting a twofer with this one. What's really, really nice is your CSM is better for bonding and gluing initially, but your heavy, long fibers are going to be higher in strength. And if you're building something like a boat or tabbing stringers in, or even in a couple episodes previously, we were laminating in a new Coosa board transom, you're going to want to go with something like that. Now, they do make a 1708 and an 1808. 1708, the weave is at a 45-degree angle. The 1808 is at a 90-degree angle, straight up and straight down. If I'm going to choose one personally, it's going to be the 1708, and that is what I keep in my shop all the time. Now, if we're going a little bit old school, that is what we call woven roven. That's in a 90-degree, straight up, straight down. And a lot of older boats use this as your heavy reinforcement. It can be a little tricky bending around corners, and it leaves a heavy print pattern on the surface. Some people may not like that, but if you're kind of going old school or an older boat, there's a good chance that is the material you're going to see. And then last but not least is what we call CSM or chop strand mat. And this is used almost universally. It's very good at initially bonding. It holds a lot of resin. It also produces a really nice cosmetic surface. Like a lot of times when our videos, we will finish with CSM or mat after we've used some heavier structural glass. But it generally doesn't work very well with your epoxies. Epoxy does not have the same solvents in it as your polyesters, like polyester and vinyl ester. And those solvents that are in the esters will melt the binder that holds this together. Epoxy does not have that. So if you try to use this, now again, not saying it's impossible on a flat surface, but if you're trying to curve this or contour it, you're going to want to use CSM with vinyl ester and polyester. That's one reason I really like the vinyl ester resin from Fiberglass Warehouse, is it has almost the strength of epoxy, a little lower price, but it's completely compatible with CSM, which we use all the time. Now, if you wanted to use these two together, you're always going to want to start your surface, like your initial bond, you're going to want to go with a CSM first. I don't ever recommend starting with a woven roven. Now, if you're going to do it though, you would start with a CSM, do a roven, another CSM, another roven, and we usually end on a CSM. That is the beauty of working with the biaxial, the 1708. It's already made together. You cut one piece and you get something that's going to work on both surfaces. Now, what we've got are some sample pieces. We're actually going to be fiberglassing. So if you guys and gals hang in there, I guarantee you there's going to be valuable content throughout. And what we're moving toward is a material overview, and then I'm actually going to put some of this stuff to practice, and we're going to be working on these wooden sample pieces. Now, I've had a lot of interest in just working with marine plywood. The last couple of days we posed the question when we're working on our project boat, would y'all like to see a Coosa board floor go in or plywood? And a lot of folks are working with plywood, so we are going to be using that as the substrate today. But one other thing that you might want to consider is there are different core materials out there that you may be fiberglassing over. This is the Airex foam core that we used when we were building the hard top for our 29. The Coosa board is a plywood replacement, but it's completely rot proof, lightweight, very strong, and that is what all the stringers and floors are built out of in our 29. Now, Divinycell is very, very popular. This is like a 5.5 pound density. There is some flex and give to it. You would glass on both sides. And then we've got Divinycell that is scored, which will actually take a complex shape. Now, All of this stuff we're using, it's available through some of our suppliers here, and I will do my very best to put a link to all of that. But prep work is a big factor. Y'all will notice we've got two different pieces. I'm gonna kind of try to do what I would consider a right way and a wrong way to do this, but I want to talk about fiberglass or surface prep. So if you folks will follow me, come on over here to the side of the shop. Now normally I would have some fans running anytime we're going to be doing any sanding, but I want to talk about working with plywood. Now this is a piece of birch interior grade plywood. You wouldn't ever want to use this if you're actually working on a boat. You need to use an exterior grade always. In our family, we grew up using marine fir plywood, F-I-R, A-B-A-A, sometimes even A-C if you're on a budget. And that would be the grades if you're not familiar with it. But there are definitely some things you need to do. So gotta use an exterior plywood if you're gonna be doing this. Do not want to use an interior grade for anything that's going to go on a boat. But something that is very, very important in getting a good, mosquitoes flying around, folks. One thing to get a really, really good bond is to put some tooth or some surface, and maybe my cameraman can zoom in. If you get in really tight on this birch, you can tell it is quite smooth and there isn't really much texture at all to speak of. So we're using a 24 grit with our little DeWalt angle grinder. Now a lot of people have a lot of questions about our backing pad. That's made by Gator Grit, and it's a 4.5 inch backer pad, and you're gonna want one of these, folks. If you're at home and you're thinking about doing fiberglass or boat work, need a little DeWalt angle grinder. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna put some tooth on this surface. All right, now again, that's a very thin veneer and we almost went through it, but you can see that there is some good etches in there, and it gives that resin something to grab onto. A lot of plywood, when it's been milled, the surface is quite smooth. It may have been shipped around and somebody may have touched it with an oily machine or something, and that is going to be a problem. You can't have any contaminants on any surface, and that is a fundamental of doing quality fiberglass work, is a clean and dry surface. Now, one of the other things fiberglass is very sensitive to is going to be hard or sharp corners, and you can see that is a very hard or sharp corner. Now, one of my favorite tools in the shop, this little Bosch palm router, and we're just using a little radius bit there. I hope you folks can see that. It's about the radius of my finger or so, and we're going to put a radius on any edge that we're going to be glassing. Yep, that is about what you want. Now, it is crucially important to put a radius on there, but there's not exactly one size. It could be softer than that. That's kind of the minimum, but it could be rounder than that if you want, but I wouldn't go any less than that. Now, if you don't have a router and you're going to want to save a little money, especially if you folks are just getting into doing fiberglass work, which that is what this video is all about, is encouraging folks that haven't been doing a lot of glass work to get into it, and don't be afraid. You can use this little grinder and you can put very good. You can see how quickly. Now, if you don't have either of those tools and you just want to use a little bit of elbow grease, 3M, and if you follow the channel, I use these little Velcro backed sanding blocks all the time. That's some 80 grit sandpaper, and they work quite well for coming in there and knocking down little burrs and edges and whatnot. They've got the small one, the bigger one, and they've even got some jumbo size ones that we use when we're building a boat or really ferrying some material out. That's money well spent. Again, I'll try to put a link below the video's description for you folks. So what we're going to try to do now is talk about workflow. So hopefully you guys have seen we've got resin, we've got glass, and we've got our core material or our substrate. And there's really like good, better, best. There's no like one perfect material for every scenario. Sometimes if you got an older boat and you don't plan to use it for that long and your budget is really tight, you're going to want to choose accordingly. But if your budget is unlimited and it's the boat of your dreams, then by all means, choose that upper tier product. But we're going back over now that we understand a little bit more. Now you can see, folks, we've done some staging and some prep work to get ready. This has already had a real nice radius put on everything. We've gone over it with a router. We've softened these edges. And if you look in there really tight, my cameraman can probably show there's some really nice grinder marks on there. That is what you want your core material, whether it's Coosa, Airex, or plywood, to look like. Now we're going to take this one, and if you look here, this is interior grade plywood. You got hard, sharp corners. You got lots of little splinters and edges. That is not that is not what you want. So hopefully we got a good visual here for everybody. So our goal today is to actually wrap this in some glass. And if you're just getting into fiberglass work, you're going to just need a good paint roller, an inexpensive, that's a 2-inch pure bristle, inexpensive disposable brush. They sell them at all your big box stores, and we have a link to them online. Now, a lot of times you'll have some loose hairs that will come out of there. Before I start doing any mixing, I like to kind of make sure to work those hairs out. But it's not a big deal if one falls out. It's pretty easy to pick them out. Matter of fact, sometimes they can just stay put. Not a problem. Now, we also use a little small roller here. And I've got a trick that we use where we wrap it with some blue tape prior to using it. And that's going to pull lots of loose hairs off of there. That is going to improve the quality of the work you see. And again, nothing fancy there, folks. For doing this at home, you DIYers don't have to spend a ton of money. This is from Lowe's. This is their 3/8 snap. It's their economy-based one. And I actually use my bandsaw, but you can use a little saw or whatnot to just cut them in half. For something like this, a small roller is going to work better. Now that's something else. I see a lot of people on YouTube using little bitty brushes, and they're just dabbing and brushing, and it's taken forever to get this material on here. And you can save a ton of time by using a roller versus just a brush. The brush is basically to mix up the resin, and then sometimes we use it in little tight corners and whatnot. So now there's one more thing I want to show you folks. I'm going to come back over here, and we may even use this third tool, and I would recommend it if you are getting into fiberglass work, is you're going to want to use a little Wagner heat source of some kind. And again, you've seen me use this on the channel, and if you don't own one, it's basically like an industrial strength hair dryer. And so you need good surface for that resin to grab down into. You need nice, soft, radiused corners for the fiberglass to bend over. And I mentioned contaminants on the surface, and moisture counts as a contaminant. So if there's any water on the surface or high humidity in the air, that could affect your initial bond. If you don't have a good initial bond, you don't have anything. It's like the foundation of your house. And so that initial coat needs to be really good. So you're going to want to come over this thing and warm up this surface, especially with plywood. You're going to want to go over. Now notice I'm not staying just in one spot, because this little thing puts out an immense amount of heat, and it can be a fire hazard. So you always want to be careful with that. Now, if your budget allows it and you want something for your shop and you're going to be doing this kind of work, a little infrared temperature sensor, and that is showing us at 75 degrees, which is another factor, folks. 75 degrees is about perfect for doing fiberglass work. Gelcoat and epoxy included in that. On the low end, epoxies can go down to about 55 degrees on the minimum. Your polyester and vinyl ester, about 60 degrees on the minimum. And then anything over the mid 90s gets pretty hard to control their cure rate. So remember that. If it's cold, you can add a little more activator or a little more catalyst. If it's hot, you're going to want to add a little bit less. Now with your ISO and your vinyl ester, you're going to be using an activator or catalyst, and just remember it's generally going to be 1 to 2% on those. 1% on the low end, 2% on the high end. And I've actually even got a little, forgive me folks, I didn't have a piece of paper, a little cheat sheet here. For 32 ounces, that would be 10 to 20 cc's, 16, 5 to 10, 8, 2.5 to 5, and then if you've got like a tiny little batch, 1 ounce would be 10 to 20 drops of activator. So that kind of gives you a little cheat sheet, and I'm sorry for you folks overseas. I know you're on the metric system in the US. We're behind you guys on that one, but it's pretty darn easy for you to calculate that 1 to 2% based on milliliters or cc's. I know you guys at home are smart enough to do the math on that one. Now, the difference with epoxy is you have a slow, a medium, and typically a fast hardener. So you're going to have different hardeners, and it is very important, and I got to emphasize this, it is very important with epoxies to be accurate on your ratios. And a lot of good suppliers and manufacturers or distributors are going to have a pump system that goes where when you're on whatever you want, like if you want a slow hardener, it would be 1 pump of the slow, 1 pump of the resin in a little mixing cup, and that's going to get you an exact ratio. But do not deviate from the ratios they prescribe, because it will not cure properly. So what we're going to be doing though is we're going to be using some of the vinyl ester from Fiberglass Warehouse for a primer coat. And again, that is very, very important if you are going to be using, especially over wood, but even your other cores. A primer coat of resin is probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make when you hear people say you can't fiberglass over plywood, or plywood will only last a couple years. If it's done right and correctly, my father built boats that were built in the 60s that are still in operation. Now, they were primarily fiberglass hulls with plywood bulkheads that were fiberglassed heavily on both sides. Notice I put some PPE on, generally a latex glove. These are again from Lowe's. Now, another trick you can do, some folks talk about these truly protecting your hands, or are they enough? You can actually put 2 pairs on, double glove, and that way as you're working along, if you get a rip or tear in one, or if you get some material stuck to it, you can just shed one of those gloves. So workflow is very important. When you do this professionally, time wasted is money lost. Now, we don't want to compromise quality. We don't want to compromise quality for speed, but it is important to not waste time, because projects are going to take longer than you probably think they're going to anyway. That's what I've always seen. So you just don't want to waste time if there's a way to speed things along. Now, we're using some MEKP. We have found this is another little item that if you don't have it in your shop, just an inexpensive little dispenser that you can squeeze it, and there's a 5cc, 10cc, 20cc, so on and so forth. And we're going to mix this pretty darn spicy, because this is going to be a primer coat. We are putting this on there just as a primer. Going to mix that in very thoroughly. Again, that is the vinyl ester, and you're going at 1 to 2%. That was probably in the upper 2% range. Now, as a general rule, I tell folks probably 100 rotations is a real good idea of how much to mix. And then every 10, 15 rotations or so, I like to really, really scrape the sides. Get a good mix there, folks. Good eye protection. That's another thing. If you're working with this stuff, probably a really good idea to protect your eyes. You may even want to consider wearing a respirator. That one's by 3M. I really like that one. That's called a Secure Click. So just be sure to take care of yourself, folks, when you're working with this stuff. A lot of times I may not wear a mask when we're in the shop. It's good open air and it's easier for me to communicate with you folks. But that is an important step. So all right, we have mixed that thoroughly. You can see it has like got an opaque look to it. That is okay. A lot of times on that initial activation, you're going to get that. So we are just going to take our little bristle brush here. There's no point in spending a lot of money. Now you could do this with a roller, but for just this small demonstration piece, a brush will work just fine. And again, folks, this is a demonstration piece that I made for you folks at home. This isn't an actual part for anything. I just wanted to be able to put this up on a table and show everybody exactly what we would do. Now this could represent a stringer going into a boat or an engine bed. There's a lot of things it could represent. You want to work it in very thoroughly. Now sometimes I will have questions. Our family personally, you'll notice there are some stainless steel screws holding this together. We have in the past screwed plywood together. Sometimes we will put a coat of resin or fiberglass in between the two layers and screw it. For this demonstration piece, it's just screwed together. It's not any fiberglass, resin, or anything in between. But I have found, in my experience, that it is quite okay to leave those screws in the wood. So it's not like you got to glue it together and then take them out if you don't want to. In my opinion, it makes it stronger. You've got the resin bonding things together and you've got the screws holding it together. Now we're going to give this a moment to penetrate. Sometimes this stuff will soak in. Initially, it looks like it's sealed. And you'll come back a few minutes later and it will be dry looking. You want to really, if there's one step that I would say is really crucial, especially with plywood, is priming this. And you folks at home that have been following our project boat, our project blazer, you may be ahead of us on the floor. We've got some other projects that we're working on here in the boat shop, and you folks that are moving ahead with your floors or transoms, especially if you're working with plywood, that is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video for you folks at home, because I didn't want to hold you up. And I'm like, we can do a smaller scale one for everybody. And I think you folks, I mean, if you're ambitious enough and smart enough to tackle a transom or floor replacement, you should be able to take the information we're giving you here and translate it. You notice I'm kind of working this in at different angles, really working it back and forth, working it in really good. Now again, since this is a demo piece and for the sake of time, we've actually got some weather headed our way this afternoon. So it's like, I'm going to have to work quickly. I don't want to get rained on. You'll notice that has kind of changed colors and gone back to a more solid color. Now, I've got a little bit left over here, folks, and I want to show you something that you can do that's very cool. Now, if you're working with just a resin like this and you got a little bit left over, you can actually make your own putties. And generally, I like a silica thickener. West System makes some as well. There's other brands. There's a 1/4-inch milled fiber. But if you're going to have if you're going to buy a filler, I generally am going to buy the milled glass fibers, or we're going to get a silica thickener. Those are my go-to, and honestly, you can make about anything you want to make So we're going to add some of the milled fibers for strength, because we have a little bit of resin left over there and we do not want it to go to waste. I'm going to kind of cut that in a little bit. That's what's amazing, folks, at home. If you're working on your RV, your car, if you're working on your boat, which I imagine that's what most of my folks at home are working on. Now, I'm racing the clock right now, folks. I activated this pretty hot, and I may I may get bit there on this, because once you activate this resin, you don't have but about 10 or 15 minutes before it starts kicking off. You can see there we're kind of cutting that in, and it's already started to thicken substantially. Now, that is something that is very important to remember. Again, if you are new to fiberglassing, you do not want to mix large quantities. You want to mix as much as you can use in 10 or 15 minutes. Generally, I never mix more than a quart at a time. And the reason for that is, when you get a large mass of this material, it can create what's called an exothermic reaction. And exothermic means it starts to generate heat, and heat is what actually makes these resins cure in the first place. And you can get this runaway train effect, folks. So don't mix large batches. You're going to want to make this so that you can kind of spread this stuff out in a pan or on a mixing board if possible. You can see we're definitely starting to thicken up there. Now, you don't want all those little chunks in there. You're going to want to blend that, and you can get all different consistencies. If you're trying to drip some down in like a little screw hole, you can go with a thinner consistency. If you're trying to make a fillet in the corners, which is basically just a radius, and see, you're just adding a little bit, testing it. We're kind of mixing as we go. If you put too much in, it's a little tricky to come back. Kind of like putting too much salt in your food. It's hard to back away from it. All right, you can see there now that's really starting to thicken. We're getting close. And you can do this with all of your resins. Your polyester, your vinyl ester, and your epoxy resins will take these thickeners, especially the colloidal silica and the milled fibers. If you're going to spend a little money and start a fiberglass kit, which that's what I hope these videos do, is inspire some folks out there. And start small. That is another big one. If you are just getting into fiberglass or whatever, we even do it here in our boat shop. We experiment with smaller jobs and smaller pieces. If you're getting a big piece and you don't have a lot of experience, it can be challenging. A smaller piece or a practice piece, get some material and just go experiment a little bit with this stuff and get a feel for it before you commit to your critical your critical application. All right, so check it out, folks. Now, this would be an example of under mixed filler, and this is going to be darn close to right. Now, I've got to speed this thing along. Now, I want to touch on, I've got my brush here that we mixed a minute ago. Generally, what we do in the shop is we always keep an acetone bucket with our rollers and our brushes, and just that quick. The brush is clean. I'm going to leave it in there propped up and ready to go. Now, we've got a couple little screw holes there, for example, if we wanted to fill those. Just a simple matter of one wipe over, one wipe down. Now, your putties and fillers are going to last a lot longer if you can spread them out on a flat surface versus inside your little mixing container. Again, that heat that they generate is not something you want when you're racing the clock. So what I'm trying to do is just get a little bit of putty all the way around these edges so we can get a little bit of what they call a fillet. It looks like fillet. When we're doing this just in the shop, it's a little easier than trying to video all this stuff, explain it and do the work at the same time. But I want to tell you how much I appreciate everybody. I got some very loyal folks out there that comment and watch and enjoy the channel, and I want to tell you genuinely thank you. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see us do more of this or enjoying the content and appreciate the effort, please hit that subscribe button, like, comment, share. It is much appreciated. Okay, so now I have modified this little spreader. Normally they have square or hard corners, but you'll notice this one's got a radius on it, or a radii, and you can oftentimes take that and we're just going right around you can see how we were able to get a nice soft radius in that corner. Now it may take a little bit of finessing, but that is something that is very important to remember. Again, is fiberglass likes nice, soft, radius corners. You do not want sharp edges. What will happen is you will get an air bubble in the corners, and it also creases the fiberglass really hard, and it can actually damage the fibers, and it makes a nice transition when it comes to loads being applied on that part. It's a nice gradual sweeping turn. The glass work is going to be better. You won't have any bubbles in there. So that is key. Now you will notice sometimes I'll wear gloves because you just have to reach down and pick up some of this stuff and clean it up a bit. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean this off, clean that up. I had a little bit extra there, probably more than we really needed. And I'm going to give this resin enough time to kind of start what I call tacking off just a little bit. And we are this close to getting ready to start laminating. So we are at our big cutting table here in the shop, which is another thing that you might want to consider doing, is some kind of a table where you can roll stuff out. Now, again, doing this professionally, we buy this material in big rolls, which is gonna save you some money and some convenience if you've got a fairly large project. The good thing to know about fiberglass is it doesn't go bad. It has a shelf life pretty much indefinitely. So if you buy some and don't use all of it, you can tuck it away in the corner. And there are several ways that you can cut fiberglass. One of them is with this these are actually Fiskar brand. I bought those at Lowe's, and they will readily cut your 1708, which is a fairly heavy fabric. Another amazing little tool that if you got like carpal tunnel or your hands get fatigued, that's called a zip snip, and it's got a little rotating blade that cuts amazingly well. Now another thing you can do is just use a razor knife and a straight edge, and it will actually cut quite nice as well. And all of these materials will do the same. You can see we can cut that with a razor knife. The same for the finishing cloth, which that is actually how I prefer to cut the finishing cloth. But the same deal for the zip snip. That's been something, especially my hands have gotten to where they get tired, and you can cut that to shape in any shape you need. Now another thing you're going to need in your shop is some Sharpies. And what I've done is I've taken one of our pieces of 1708 biaxial, and I'm going to use it as a pattern. I've already dry fit on one side of our piece, and that is another insider secret, is when you're getting ready to do some fiberglass work, you're going to want to do a dry fit or a test fit first. So that way, you know, when you're in a hurry, you know exactly where your cuts need to be. So here we go. Again, scissors can work very good. I'm gonna cut most of that that marker off of there. Now, you do have to be careful using the markers because sometimes it will bleed out, and if you're using like a gel coat or a painted surface, you wouldn't want to use that marker right on the top layer because you may get some staining coming out of there. Pleating your fiberglass is another one of those very important steps that a lot of people, and when I say pleat, these little notches and cutouts are going to be very important to getting a quality job. All right, everyone, so this episode's running a bit long and we have finished all of the prep, but I believe we're going to make this a two-part video for you folks. So stay tuned for part 2 where we're getting ready to apply all the fiberglass and finish out to our project piece. If you're enjoying the channel, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, tell a friend. It's Captain Joe here, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan is my amazing cameraman, and we will catch you folks in the next episode.